I was asked to speak this week to the assembled masses about the topic of Bechirah Chofshis, free will. And the topic of Bechirah Chofshis, it's important to start with the following interesting insight from Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, who's a Rosh Yeshiva in Baltimore. Rabbi Weinberg said that if you look at the Yugim Likarim of the Rambam, you look at the 13 principles, which are the basic principles of our belief. One of them, there is no principle of Bechirah Chofshis, of free will. There's a principle of reward and punishment, but there is no principle of free will. So that means that the Rambam held that one could be a good Jew, even though one didn't believe in free will. So you ask, how is this possible? How can somebody be a good Jew if they don't believe in free will? And the answer is that whether you believe in free will or not, you will act with free will. In other words, your actions will be determined by you based on what you perceive and will at the time, regardless of whether you believe that that's what's actually happening. So therefore, we don't have to require you to believe in free will, because you're going to exercise free will. Okay? Now, it's a very interesting insight. Now, some would say, well, no, the Rambam does, as I say, enumerate reward and punishment. And some would say that reward and punishment indicate free will. Because if a person is not rewarded and punished, then a service reward and punishment would seem to indicate that there's a will which we can influence. This, of course, is not true, because many behavioral psychologists believe there is no free will, but they have not actually advocated for necessarily the abolition of the death penalty or for the abolition of incarceration. Because obviously, reward and punishment is one of the determinants which determine behavior. In other words, even though hold this free will, means that there are many, many factors which go into your choices in life. And one of those factors can be the fear of incarceration or lack thereof, or the fear of capital punishment or lack thereof. And that actually, therefore, doesn't indicate, the fact that there's reward and punishment does not indicate that there's free will, but this is part and parcel of the set of circumstances which are going to lead a person to do what he does or doesn't do. So again, the fact that there's reward and punishment does not necessarily indicate that there's free will. It just indicates that that reward and punishment are good ways to manipulate or channel behavior. You with me on this so far? Okay. So now, is there actually free will, or is there not actually free will? So, of course, the free will is limited regardless. And there's a Tiferes Yisrael at the end of Kiddushin, which is a very, very basic primer on the topic of free will, which he says there's certain things which are beyond your will, which are things which are determined by who your parents are, where you're born, what period of the world's history you're born in, right? Or what the capacities which you have, the physical capacities which you have, or even the intellectual capacities that you have, or lack thereof. So all those things are actually not subject to will. One cannot will oneself to be brilliant if one is not capable of being brilliant. Conversely, one cannot will oneself to be dumb if one is not dumb. You can will yourself to be ignorant, but you can't will yourself to be dumb. One cannot will oneself to being a professional basketball player if one is 5'6". There are certain things which in this world do not happen as a result of who you are, as a result of circumstances which are beyond your control. Okay, so that's clear. Everybody has to agree that free will is not absolute. So what about when my free will, let's say having free will, comes into contact with another person's free will and clashes with it? So this is a big issue among those who do believe in free will. Is my free will curtailed or limited by the impact it will have on your free will? Or is it not curtailed and impacted for that? And the classic example, the famous example, is the Ohr Somayach in Parshas Vayeshev, where it says that they threw Yosef into, Reuven suggested they throw Yosef into the pit, and they threw him into the pit, and the Gemara says that even though the pit was empty of water, but it had snakes and scorpions. So Ohr Somayach asked, why was this advantageous to Yosef to be thrown into a pit if there are going to be snakes and scorpions in the pit? It doesn't seem to be any safer than having to confront the brothers. And the Ohr Somayach answers. He says that one human being, an animal cannot hurt you unless you're destined to be hurt. Unless your time has come, unless there's a decree in Shamayim. Another human being can hurt you even if it's not your destiny to be hurt at this point. So the snakes and scorpions can't kill Yaakov if Yaakov doesn't deserve to, Yosef. If Yosef doesn't deserve to die at this point. But the brothers could have killed Yosef if Yosef, even though Yosef did not deserve to die. This is based on a Zohar, which appears at the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. Others disagree with this Zohar. I'm not the Zohar. It's the Ohr Somayach's interpretation of the Zohar. And prominent among them is Rav Dessler. Rav Dessler does not, I don't remember that he addressed the Ohr Somayach by name, but he talks about the Zohar. And he says that, of course, nothing happens to Ruvain unless it's destined to happen to Ruvain, even though Shimon wants to kill him or harm him. But, so the question is, so then, where is there any free will involved in our relationships with other people? So he wants to say it like this. He says, sometimes a person has done something ambiguous. It's not clear, good, bad, indifferent. And such a person's judgment could be to be given over, midah keneged midah, correspondingly, to somebody who's going to exercise their free will in determining that person's fate. Okay, so it's a cute idea. What? Okay, so let's say Reuven did something morally ambiguous, right? So now in Shamayim they have to judge him. They have to give him a proper fate in this world. So it was an ambiguous thing. So what they do on him is they give Reuven over to Shimon's free will. Because Shimon can now decide, based on whatever Shimon decides, that's going to be Reuven's fate. Because Reuven did something ambiguous, so therefore the situation of punishment is also an ambiguous one. That it could go either way for him. So that's in that case you'd say that the judgment of someone is that they should be in a situation where they can be affected by somebody else's free will. But otherwise, that would be only a very small slice of circumstances, and in most circumstances, Reuven and Shimon cannot impact upon each other unless each other deserve it. In other words, Reuven could not assassinate Shimon unless Shimon's time had come. By deserve, I don't mean that they deserve to be killed, but rather that this is the decree in Shamayim that he should be killed. Reuven cannot come and kill Shimon unless Shimon's time has come, and this could apply not just to killing, but to stealing or all sorts of other things. Reuven cannot steal from Shimon unless Shimon is supposed to be stolen from. Okay? Now, and so on and so forth. So this is a tremendous machlokas. Again, can Reuven's free will impact upon Shimon? Or is Shimon's destiny so firmly embedded in creation that Reuven cannot impact upon him in any way, shape, or form? And there's no resolution to this machlokas, right? There are people who will swear by one side, people who swear by the other side, and there's no definitive perspective, no definitive answer to the question. It's not resolved, and I don't think Hashem meant it to be resolved. Hashem meant this to be one of the great questions of creation which are left open. So a person is entitled really to believe what they want. It's kind of random, I know, because we have no way of proving either way. But to me, the Ohr Somayach's opinion does make sense, that the free will of Reuven will affect Shimon, even if Shimon was not destined to have this, whatever occurrence, whatever thing Reuven's going to do to him, happen to him at that moment. By the way, it also works the other way around, which is that Reuven can decide to give me $1 million, even though God doesn't necessarily have in mind, so to speak, that I should get $1 million. Right? Anybody, according to this, there's a much more randomness in creation. because people's free will manipulates things in ways which are not necessarily decreed in Shemayim. Now, of course, this brings us up to the old question, which is one of the most fundamental paradoxes in Judaism, which is that, but God knows what's going to happen ahead of time. So, isn't God's knowledge a form of determinism? Doesn't it mean that since God already knows what's going to happen, that it's already preordained what's going to happen? There's a question called the question of Yediyah versus Bechirah. If God has foreknowledge of everything that's going to happen, how can there be free will? Okay? Anybody here ever heard this question before? Yes. So how do you answer it for yourself?
I would say that just because he knows it, when he created the creation, he knew what was going to happen with creation, but that doesn't mean that he is the actual cause of those decisions. You're still the one choosing right from wrong.
Right. So the simple response is what you're saying, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's knowledge is not a determining factor. The fact that I know something is going to happen doesn't mean that I determine it's going to happen. I just know it's going to happen. The Ralbag, though, who's one of the Rishonim, who's a bit controversial for reasons, among other reasons, but I'm going to tell you right now, is bothered by the same question, and he says that God does not know the future. God knows everything that has happened till this point, but he doesn't know the future. And the future this doesn't diminish God's perfection, because A, things which didn't happen yet. B, God has tremendous powers to manipulate the future, right? To bring about the circumstances he wants to bring about. But according to this, the Ralbag is difficult. I don't know if I've ever seen the Ralbag inside. I think it's quoted by Rabbi Bleich in his book With Perfect Faith. I'm not sure I ever saw it in a primary source. But according to Ralbag, one of the other problems is that it means that God exists in time. And one of the variations on the theme of the answer, which Daniel gave before, is that reason why God's knowledge of our future activities is not considered to be an impediment to our free will, is because the only reason why God knows these things is that because he exists outside of time. Since he exists outside time, there is no past, present, or future for him. Therefore, he knows everything because all has taken place already from his perspective, which transcends time. By the way, there's a misconception that the neshamos or malachim, souls or angels, are not bound by time. This is not true. They certainly are bound by time. Everything which exists in the universe exists in time, except for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God created time, and once he created time, everything else exists in time. So it's possible that after a person passes away or malach, they may be able to time travel back in time. And time may go faster or slower for them, but there still is time. Time always exists for anybody except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? So, the idea of Yediyah Bechirah is a very difficult one. And the Rambam brings it up, and he says that there's an answer to it. He says, I'm not going to tell you the answer. And the Ravid says on the Rambam, if you're not going to tell us the answer, why did you bring up the question? Right? This is going to be bothersome to people. So, but this the Ohr Somayach on the Rambam. Ohr Somayach meaning not the building in which we are located right now, but the actual person, Reb Meir Simcha Kohen of Dvinsk, says that he accepts the position that since God exists like I just said, since God exists outside of time, therefore his knowledge is not a predetermination, but rather he knows it because it's happening. And that's alluded to in last week's parsha. It says in last week's parsha, and it's a very strange chazal, but chazal say that a faro shel Yitzchak tzavru munach al gabei mizbeach. The ashes of Yitzchak are on the mizbeach, on the altar in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So first of all, the basic question in the Medrash is, what do you mean the ashes of Yitzchak? He was never sacrificed. So this you can answer on a simple level.
Ashes of Yosef.
No, the ashes of the ram, because the ram was was instead of Yitzchak, right? So that the ashes of the ram are there, but of course they're not there, right? If you go there today, you'll find a dome of the rock. You won't find the ashes. But since everything from God's perspective occurs both simultaneously and eternally, so therefore from God's perspective the ashes are still there. That's how Rav Dessler explains the notion of Zchus Avos. Says, why should I have any merit just because my parents had merit, or because Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had merit, right? Like we always daven to Hashem, that you should remember us the merit of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he says, the way he tries to explain it is that he says that it's as if there's a split screen in front of Hashem. And on one side he sees the deeds of the Avos, and on the other side he sees your deeds. And again, since time doesn't exist before Hashem, so therefore he sees everything simultaneously. And so he says, so if there's an affinity, there's a connection, there's a parallel of some sort between your screen and Avraham Avinu's screen, then there's Zchus Avos, because that means that there's some connection which leapt over all the generations and all the distance and so on and so forth. And therefore you have the merit of the Avos. But if there's a total disconnect, your behavior has no relationship to Avraham Avinu's behavior, so there is no Zchus Avos. Because on the contrary, seeing this in split screen in front of you makes it worse, because now you Avraham Avinu makes you look pretty bad by comparison. Okay, so again, this idea of the God existing out of time is the one that the Ohr Somayach gives to understand why there's no issue of Yediyah, of God's foreknowledge, contradicting Bechirah, free will.
Isn't that what the Rambam says?
Rambam does not say it explicitly. It's not in the. So Ohr Somayach brings down from, I think, the Ram or the Ri Almosino, not from the Rambam himself. One could come to that conclusion based on Rambam, because God exists out of time according to Rambam, but Rambam never makes it explicit. Okay. Again, Rambam says he's not answering the question for us. Now this brings us to the question of free will in our own personal lives. How much of it is free after all the circumstances of your birth, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to start with Rav Dessler, because Rav Dessler's has the kind of like the standard view of Bechirah, of free will, and then if we have either this time or next time we can get into the alternative views. But the standard view of Rav Dessler is Rav Dessler's, and Rav Dessler says a very famous mashal, perhaps the most famous analogy, that metaphor which the Rav Dessler uses in Michtem Leo, is that the point of Bechirah Chofshis is like the front line in trench warfare. In other words, in World War I, when people fought, there was trench warfare, so then the front line was kind of in a no man's land, which ran between the front trenches of the Allies and the front trenches of the Axis. And that land, over the course of the World War I, used to go back and forth, a yard forward, a yard back, maybe half a mile either direction, and there was constant flux, back and forth and back and forth. And the front, of course, extended over hundreds, perhaps thousands of miles from Switzerland on the western front, from Switzerland in the south to the French seacoast, of Belgium, actually. So so Dessler says, why is this mashal important? Because it tells you that really very few things are actually at the point at which free will is being exercised. Now, this is particularly bad for FFB people, because FFB people exercise almost no free will, and they may not exercise any free will in the course of their entire lives. Why is that? Because they're born into habits, into rote behavior. It's what Yeshayahu Nabi calls mitzvahs anoshim u'moda, mitzvahs which people do just because they're accustomed to do them. If somebody who is frum gets up in the morning and goes to davening, depends where he's born. If he's born in a community where people did not go to davening, and he goes davening, that is an act of will. But if he goes, was raised in an environment, the atmosphere, where people went to davening with meaning every morning, that's not an act of free will. He's just doing what people do. Okay, yes?
I mean, at any point of him getting up, he could just say, no, right? Like, I'm going back to bed. So why could, his continuous choice of saying yes.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm making every other step towards the shul.
Because
each one of those is a choice. You can make the choice at any point to turn
right,
around.
but free will, exercise free will, it has to be really like 50-50. In other words,
Why can't it be like 99-1?
because then it's
Because
very...
if there's still a 1, you could
Yeah,
still choose
in
it.
theory, yes, but in practice, the people, when the odds are long, people go with the behavior they're accustomed to. Yeah, I'm not saying, a from
Right.
guy can decide tomorrow to go to McDonald's,
Right.
and yeah, but it's unlikely. Like most from people don't have a desire for cheeseburgers, so what are they going to do? There's no temptation to go to McDonald's.
Right.
If you had a cheeseburger, then it's real free will to go to McDonald's, right? Right? To refrain, I'm sorry for going to McDonald's, right? It will also be it'll be act free will on both sides. That's the truth. The from guy who goes to McDonald's, FFP who goes to McDonald's, that's an act of free will, and the Baal Tshuva who avoids McDonald's, that's also an act of free will. But for things that you're accustomed to, there's not much. In fact, if you don't murder somebody
Yeah.
to get their sneakers, you're not getting much reward for that. There was always a chance.
Like I could, has a phone. Like,
Yes, but they're not going. There's no reward for you. You're not going to kill someone for their Air Jordans.
no, but
Okay, but
the point is like.
but wait a second. In a society where people do murder each other for their Air Jordans, so then there's a tremendous reward for refraining from murdering somebody for their Air Jordans. Right?
I mean, yeah, but if I were to do it, I would have a punishment.
What?
If I were to do it in this society.
Yeah, you have punishment because that would be the act of will to go and do it.
Right.
There's not much act of will in refraining from doing it. What does an act of will mean? It means I have to use my will, which in Hebrew is ratzon, of course, but I have to activate my will in order to accomplish something. If I'm doing, it's not an act of will for me not to murder somebody. It's not an act of will for me not to steal from somebody. It's a given. Right? It's maybe an act of will, would be a tremendous act of will for me not to eat a cookie.
I mean, why can't you say that?
But I'm not sure how much reward I get punishment for that.
Why does will have to be active? Why can't you say that, like habit is a form of...
But see, that's Odessa's point. He's saying that the Nekudas HaBechirah, the point of Bechirah, is only at that line. There are things which are well behind the lines, sort of safe territory, and the things which are well above, beyond the line, enemy lines, sort of something which is remotely aspirational, but it's not realistic. So, a person's free will takes place at that point where the two trenches meet each other. Okay. Again, there is perhaps minimal reward for doing the right thing when you're accustomed to doing the right thing. But it's not anything like the reward and anything like the accomplishment of something where your will is being challenged. Okay? By the way, things like getting up and down in the morning, they can be an active free will one's entire life because one can actually feel, never get used to getting up in the morning. But if a person gets used to it and becomes by rote, so then that's not considered an active free will. What did you want to say before?
No, I was going to say what he said.
Okay, so that's Rav Dessa's point of Nekudas HaBechirah. There is free will, but don't think that free will is something which you're exercising all the time across the board. It's relatively rarely exercised. Okay, so again, to show up to, if you have a seder to learn, you have a time period when Shulun Chavrus and you show up. Okay, big deal. But not to waste time, that may be already an act of will, because people tend to waste time. That still doesn't tell us how much free will a person has. By that I mean, does the person have free will on their actions, on the world of action and practice, or does free will only exist within your own head? Or, again, the responsible free will doesn't exist at all. Everything you do is predetermined. And that there are Rishonim, there's at least one Rishon Chazdoi Kreskas who says that. He says there is no free will. He says don't tell people this because they'll get depressed. But there is no free will. Then, yes?
I mean, that's just going against what we said previously. But what is kind of like, I never understood this idea of you don't have free will. If I see a thing, I can choose. Like, I can choose to pick up this chair right now.
You think you're choosing.
Like,
You're-
if you're talking about it, you can invent all sort of psychological
Right.
theory of really it's whatever, but
Right.
really, empirically, I can choose to pick up this chair right now. Look, I did it. Wow.
That's Rabbi Weinberg's point. That they are exercising choice whether they realize it or
I'm
not.
saying, how could you argue against at least?
So the behavioral psychologists, the most famous one being B.F. Skinner, would say that if I know everything which is going on in your mind, all the antecedents of your thought process, I would be able to predict with 100% accuracy whether you pick up the chair or not.
How would you even? Like, that's a bold claim.
Right, it's a bold claim, and it's not really possible.
It's I don't think you can really prove that at all.
I heard something like because our birth, home place are fixed, we didn't have a free choice in that. Then all the events preceding after that are also not your choice.
Everything which has to do with that basic foundation which you received, yes.
So so I'm saying like the fact that you can pick up that chair, even though it looks like free will, it's not free will because it was not your choice to even be there in the first place, because it was not your choice to be born.
Well, but that's saying.
The choice is between me being here and picking it up versus me being here and not picking it up, right?
What?
Saying if I wasn't here, obviously I wouldn't have a choice to pick up the chair.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say circumstances of my birth or upbringing or whatever it is brought me here, fine. But
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm here, like what's influencing me to pick up this chair?
Okay, but now, it's even though your point is very valid, right? I agree with you. Even though behavioral deterministic psychologists will not agree with you, I agree with you. But there are certain things in life which even people tend, at least in Judaism, to believe where free will is limited, which is, for example, the classic example which people always give is who you're going to marry, right? That these are things which are predetermined. So there is, you think you're exercising will when you determine who you're going to marry. You think so. But according to this, it's predetermined. So it's not. It just happens to be that this was the way you came to this person. But that person was predestined. And the question is, even if let's say there is no predestiny on a chair, picking up a chair. But there is predestiny on a spouse. So where does it begin and when does it end? That's a very, very gray area. Nobody knows exactly where it begins and ends, and we don't know when HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes us do something, doesn't make us do something. There's a Tzaddik HaKohen who says very dramatically that sometimes God makes you sin. He makes you do an Aveira. So if he makes you an Aveira, he's obviously sending you a message. Yeah. But he could, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, make you an Aveira. Now you don't know if Hashem made you do the Aveira or not. But Hashem made you do it. Hashem made you do it, and you have to treat it as if you did yourself, even though it might not be. And the classic example we have coming up is Yehuda and Tamar, right? Yehuda was compelled by God or by a Malach, the same thing for our purposes, to go have relations with Tamar. It wasn't his free will, right? But yet he had to understand that from his perspective, he has to treat these things as free will. In other words, you can never hide behind the devil made me do it or God made me do it.
But it also wasn't sin for him.
What? Yeah, I'm just giving that as an example of something which is not appropriate for him to do. He did because he thought he was having relations with a prostitute.
Saying like now that we have the Torah, we have like what is it? It's like everything's in the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven.
Right. Right.
And we see that you have mitzvahs and averos, or
Right.
you can choose what to
Right.
do with them.
So the Ishbitzer, who is an extreme proponent of non-Bechirah, he says that Hakol b'dei Shemayim chutz miras Shemayim is not true. Everything is b'dei Shemayim, including Yiras Shemayim. It's just that we don't want you to, again, just like, but it's bad for us to tell you that, because then you're going to say, okay, well, if God gives me Yiras Shemayim, so I have it. If I don't have to work on it, and that's not good because no, you're supposed to work on it. But the Ishbitzer,
Then how are you working on it?
okay, so the Ishbitzer, so you're right. So the Ishbitzer says that what a person has free will upon, if they have free will, and again, he holds free will is very limited, even more limited, much more limited than Reb Dessler, is on their attitude. The way that it's that what attitude you take towards things which happen or things you do in your life is what on which you have free that which you upon which you have free will. You cannot necessarily change what you're going to do, and you might, according to Ishbitzer, so you might have been predetermined that you're going to pick up that chair. But are you going to pick up the chair with simcha, or are you going to pick up the chair with sadness? That's up to you. Okay, so attitude is up to you. Circumstance, and that means that every circumstance, according to Ishbitzer, which befalls a person, may well be decreed. Reb Tzadok says not necessarily every circumstance, but seems according to Ishbitzer, yes, every circumstance. Reb Tzadok was the Talmud of the Ishbitzer, who in turn was the Talmud of the Kotzker. But in any event, there is this notion that only your attitude is where you have free will. And that's because free will is in your head. That's why it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzaref, machshava tov l'maaseh. Hashem gives you the refinement of a good thought as if you did it. Now, of course, you didn't do it. But since in your mind, the will was complete and full, the fact that you weren't able to bring it to fruition on a technicality doesn't detract from your from the fact that you exercised will to the extent that you thought and decided to do the thing you're doing. I think it's late, so we'll stop here for tonight. I'll continue again. We'll continue next week on the topic of Bechirah, unless you want to go on to something else
This is
specifically.
good stuff.
Okay, fine. Okay.